This is my lathe. It is award number 1 capstan lathe. Why capstan lathe, you might ask? Well, in the 1970s the opportunity arose to purchase a lathe from my former place of employment. At the time they were replacing their manual lathes with the latest plugboard machines. I purchased this lathe. As I recall, it cost me around $40. It came complete with its collet head, a box full of collets and its material feed bar. Also included was the overhead shaft and pulleys and various leather belts. I purchased a 1 horsepower electric motor to drive the lathe, as well as a 3-jaw self-centering and a 4-jaw independent chuck, as my intention always was to use it as a centre lathe. Before using the lathe, I stripped it completely, cleaning years of built-up swarf, grease and grime, and then repainted it. It could do with a repaint now. Overall, the lathe was in pretty good condition considering a life spent in a factory. The spindle is supported on 2 very large ball or roller bearings, I can't remember which, but I had to replace one of them, and at the time it probably cost me as much as the lathe did. The bronze nut on the cross slide screw was quite worn, so I had a new one made, but that was all I had to replace. E.P. Bevan & Son were the distributors of this lathe, as shown on their attached nameplate. I don't know how old the lathe is, but in 1938 E.P. Bevan & Son merged with Macpherson's Limited, who were agents and manufacturers of machinery, so this lathe must predate 1938. For the large award lathes there is considerable information on the internet. However, for the award number 1 there is virtually no information available. The turret has the number 80 and the test number 1221 stamped on it, but I don't know if either of these constitute a serial number or can be used to identify its age. Award number 1 has a centre height of 5 inches. The spindle capacity was listed as 1 inch, but it will accept 1 1/8 at a pinch. Although it is a flatbed lathe, the wear on the bed was minimal, so it still machines quite accurately. It's a fairly simple lathe. It isn't gear drive, there isn't a lead screw, so it's manual feed, but because these old lathes were intended for reliable factory service over many years, they are a very solid build. Having a sturdy spindle supported by really large bearings provides a very stable platform for any machining requirements. Capstan lathes are really intended for production of large numbers of identical parts. When I got this lathe, many thought I was silly for not getting a centre lathe, but it was what I could afford at the time. Over the years I have machined thousands of parts on this lathe and have come to appreciate the positive aspects of it. Being a capstan lathe, it lacks a tailstock and a compound slide, but one of the many benefits of a capstan lathe is that up to 6 individual items can be loaded in the capstan. I maintain a centre drill, a keyless chuck, a bar stop and a live centre. Having various accessories loaded in the capstan saves considerable time over having to change items in a tailstock for each process. The bar stop is used to set the position of the material in the chuck when making multiples of the same part. The turret saddle can be positioned anywhere along the bed, and each of the 6 positions of the turret has a threaded adjustable stop that controls the distance the auxiliary slide can plunge. The cross slide carries a turning tool and a parting tool that parts off from the rear. This reduces the chatter and the possibility of the parting tool digging in. A stop can be fitted to the cross slide to control the finished diameter of a part, although I rarely use it. The saddle has multiple stops that can be set to limit the travel, very useful when turning or boring to a prescribed depth. When parting off or facing material, the saddle can be locked in any position along the bed. To engage or disengage the drive, the motor is simply raised or lowered. By the 1930s, gear-driven capstan lathes were available, but belt drive lathes were still being produced because many factories still used overhead line shafts. In the factory where this lathe came from, there was an overhead line shaft driving multiple machines. I think the overhead shaft and pulleys that I have were an intermediate shaft driven off the line shaft. The spindle has a handbrake that operates brake shoes in a brake drum, just like mechanical brakes on early cars. The various combinations of pulleys gives me 12 speeds ranging from around 100 RPM to around 1000 RPM. The motor and pulley arrangement was intended as a temporary setup to get the lathe operational. That was over 40 years ago. It's still there because so far I haven't had any problems with it. Well, that's it, a short tour around what I think is a wonderful little machine, the Ward No. 1 capstan lathe. I'll finish off with a few photos of parts that I've made, all of which had at least some machining done on this lathe.